Welcome to the Energy and Society Lecture Series. Today, we have Parker Dubee from Technocracy, Inc. presenting. One of the purposes of this series is to bring together people who are thinking about energy and society, kind of the science of it and its implications for governance society, and also the bigger picture into one forum, so to speak, so that this information is in one place for all of you, and also for people who are in this and have an interest in this to get to know each other better. I'd like to introduce Parker. Parker was born in Michigan, and he is a descendant of the founders of the Bissell vacuum cleaner, one of whom was the first female CEO of a major corporation. He graduated from Johns Hopkins University with degrees in biomedical engineering and biodefense, including master's. He's been an ardent supporter of Technocracy, Inc. because he actually has a very pro-science outlook on some of the things that Technocracy is doing based upon his work in medical research for the Army, Navy, NASA, and he intends to pursue a doctorate back at NASA to study the pathophysiological effects of spaceflight on astronauts. For those of you who've been to NASA Ames, I know a number of the people who will view this video have been, he worked there for a while as well. So without further ado, Parker.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Fred, for attending my little mini lecture. If you don't mind, I actually presented a really, I would say, pretty spot on PowerPoint brief for everyone. I think that's it. I'm gonna set this off to automatically play so it doesn't give away any of these secrets. All right, and so following along with what Mark was saying is, this brief is hopefully an introduction into Technocracy Incorporated for you or any other individuals who Technocracy Incorporated might have flown under the radar over the past years, but is definitely one of the earlier, maybe one of the earliest groups of individuals who started measuring the effect of energy on society and tried to formulate a system of procedures and research in order to try and quantify that and see how the incorporation of energy into national construction and decision-making can affect human outlook. And so just a quick history. And so Technocracy Incorporated was first found its breath of life in the Technical Alliance, which was a group of scientists, engineers, and technicians in New York City who were sponsored by Columbia University to conduct an energy survey of North America in 1919. And the goal of that was to basically do a complete census of the total energy producers of the country, as well as the total energy expenditures, as in like factories and transportation. The research that they gathered from this technical alliance would go on to sow the seeds of Technocracy Incorporated's research. Moving forward, some of the notable members of the technical alliance, one of them was Charles Proteus Steinmetz, who was a mathematician and electrical engineer, and basically laid the mathematical foundations for alternating current and was basically known as the father of the US modern power grid. Other notable members include Benton McKay, a graduate of Harvard University, a forester and conservationist, who is most famous for being the originator of the Appalachian Trail. Richard C. Tolman, a physical chemist and mathematical physicist at University of Caltech, who did work for the US Army during the Manhattan Project in the development of the first atomic bomb, who also worked with J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was also on the Manhattan Project, and George Volkoff on the mathematical discovery of neutron stars before they were even visualized to exist, as well as working on some of the basics of general relativity after the theory was posited by Albert Einstein, who you can see in the center there. I love the way that Dr. Albert Einstein is looking blankly into the corner. I love it. I'm going to take a picture like one day. Other notable members include pioneering architects, economists, and sociologists who studied the effects of energy, the current situation of the time. This is back during the 1920s and roaring 20s and what led afterwards. And so there are many individuals who were looking at the current situation saying, well, this is not as great as it can be now. Is there any way to change it in the future? And so many of these members would go on to join the Technical Alliance using their expertise in their fields, as well as providing information that Technocracy Incorporated would benefit from in the future. I'd say one of the more, or maybe the most notable member of Technocracy Incorporated is its founder, Howard Scott, who was humbly a cement engineer but whoever was able to design and organize the researchers and information collected from the Technical Alliance, as well as some of the researchers from that group, to find Technocracy Incorporated in 1933, where he led as chief engineer until 1970. So he went from one man with a set of collecting a set of ideas and information from the Technical Alliance to giving an auditorium in the Hollywood Bowl, which you can see in the center there, surrounded by members and followers in uniform gray suits. All right, so now a brief introduction to Technocracy Incorporated, the candy in the center of the wrapper of this presentation. So another notable member was Dr. Marion King Hubbard, also known as Dr. M. King Hubbard, who was a petroleum engineer for the Shell Oil Company, but he was also an ardent supporter of Technocracy Incorporated and what co-founded it with Howard Scott, and then went on to write the Technocracy Study Course, which is basically the core text of Technocracy's research and ideas. You can find many of these copies actually hidden throughout universities around the United States and Canada. I actually found a real copy in Johns Hopkins University, which was donated by Canadian members back in 1956. And so I checked it out, I read it twice. I have my own personal copy, I think I have two. So basically the point of this presentation was to simply take about the 23 chapters of the study course, which like says the core text of Technocracy Inc. and its research on energy and its effect on human civilization. And we're just going to try and go through each of the chapters or lessons, as we call them, in sort of brief formats, just so it can sow the seeds. If you have any interest in any particular lesson, this can spark your interest and maybe encourage you to delve further into Technocracy Inc. So lesson one in Introduction to Science. I think we're all pretty much, we can breeze right through this if we're scientifically oriented. But basically lesson one just originates the foundation of a fact by scientific standards. And that it declares that there is only one science and that the branches of science like geology, chemistry, and whatnot are the branches of science which combine different fields of study. You can combine different branches to form syncretic branches. So for instance, we're talking about biochemistry is the wedding of biology and chemistry. And so you have all these branches under one science. Engineering is simply science applied to physical processes, manufacturing processes. The same is true for medicine, agriculture, steel production, anything like that. There's essentially no difference between engineering and science, medicine and science. They're just one and the same. One of them is the application of the other. Moving forward. All right, simply put, matter. We all learned about this in third grade, but basically the earth and everything in the universe is composed of matter, composed mainly of the common substances, solids, liquids, and gases. This matter is composed of molecules, which in turn is composed of atoms of the elements. Matter cannot be destroyed without the conservatory release of energy. As we can see, we'll see later on in the laws of thermodynamics, the conservation of energy, and as well as matter. Units of measurements. Most anything in the physical universe can be measured by how much mass it has, how its dimensions in terms of length, and the duration of time. Syncretic units of measurement can be formed by the combination of these different or similar related units, such as man-hour in terms of physical labor and kilogram-kilometer or foot-pound in terms of freight cargo. Breezing right through this. Energy. If anything has capacity to do work on this planet, anything from horse racing to hurricanes to steel production, the machineries of steel production is said to possess energy. This energy, like many other the physical units, can be measured. And the units of measurement, there's a dozen, but for various applications. But some of the more common ones are ergs, joules, and in today's modern times, kilowatt hours. Laws of thermodynamics. All right, simply put, this is basically the foundational law of physics and a unbreakable law of the universe. There's about four. However, right now Technocracy Incorporated just wishes to, I just wish to discuss about two because I don't want to load everyone's mind and sink it. But basically the first law of thermodynamics, which goes upon the conservation of energy, which is that energy cannot be created or destroyed in an isolated system such as the universe. And the second law of thermodynamics, which is the entropy of an isolated system always tends to increase. And so basically fuel and energy tends to be used up into an unusable form of energy such as heat. I use the picture of condensation on a glass I first had an equation of water, the formation of water from hydrogen and oxygen and the combustion of water back into hydrogen and oxygen, showing how on both sides of the equation, the energy is balanced. However, I thought this picture was a little bit more romantic as it shows as The boiling of water into steam is an endothermic reaction. It takes energy. Condensation being an exothermic reaction, where steam goes back into liquid water, releases the same amount of energy that it took to put in. However, the entropy of that cabin, which I assume the picture is being taken in, nonetheless increased by the burning of fuels and usable energy. Moving on, lesson 6, engines. An engine is any type of machine which can take energy in the form of fuel and use it to perform any sort of work. And the efficiency of engines can be measured by the ratio of the amount of energy put in via fuel and the amount of work exported, which can also be, as we saw, measured in terms of units of energy. All types of fuel, anything from coal, food to nuclear material, produce a certain and consistent amount of energy, otherwise known as a heat value, when consumed, which can also be measured. And so some fuels have higher heat value or more energy dense than other fuels, and so on and so forth. I love that photo right there. They look like they're on a carriage ride at the mall. All right, the human engine. So just as much as the engines of a railroad or a plane is a machine that takes fuel and converts into work, so is the human body a form of engine, and our fuel is basically food. However, biologists have measured that as an engine, the human body is only really efficient at 25% efficiency in peak physical work. And so the human body has a certain limit to how much physical work it can produce as an efficient engine. The rest of the energy is used to maintain the human body in terms of sleeping, tissue regeneration, and whatnot, and so forth. Lesson 8, we're about a third of the way through. This one's very simple. And so almost all energy used by humanity, whether it be water power, wind power, food collected from plants, or fuel collected from oil and natural gases, originally came from the sun. Now, there is a small percentage contributed by geothermal activity. However, it's pretty much negligent compared to the vast amount of quantities that are given simply by the sun. So we just simply use the sun in our calculations for the most part. Dynamic equilibrium. So the existence of every species of plant and animal on this planet is dependent upon its successful competition for the total share of energy, the total share of the flow of energy that goes on this planet. And so we see in the beginning picture here, we have 2 rabbits introduced to a field of grass with no predators. And as you see on the right, as the rabbits eat and reproduce, the amount of grass that grows enough to sustain the growing rabbit population decreases. And so at some point, both species will reach an equilibrium where basically the number of rabbits that can survive in that system is equal only to the amount of grass that is able to feed those rabbits. And so anything greater, anything lower will disturb the dynamic equilibrium. Now, in the third panel on the bottom left, what would happen if scientists introduced now a pair of coyotes into this fenced area? Well, the same thing that happened with the rabbits to eat in the grass, the same thing will happen with the coyotes eating the rabbits. The coyotes will eat enough of the rabbits in order to grow their population up to a point in which there will be just enough rabbits for that coyote population to survive. And in such a way, that rabbit and that grass's dynamic equilibrium were shifted because of the introduction of coyotes. The same principles of dynamic equilibrium that apply to the grass, rabbits, and coyotes apply the same way to humans. However, as ancient humans developed technologies such as fire, hunting weapons, shelter, and whatnot, they tapped for the first time what's known as extraneous energy, which is energy that's outside of human food. And so with that, they were able to shift their dynamic equilibrium so that they were able to have a longer lifespan and grow in population. Use of hunting weapons allowed them to hunt more food and protect themselves from saber-toothed tigers, which protected the population and allowed them to grow. Use of fire helped them survive cold winters and make food healthier, which allowed their population to become healthy and to increase the population. And so these advancements of technology allow for the increase in the human population and thus an increase in their dynamic equilibrium. And so lesson 10, I basically just went through in lesson 9, but basically since the ancient days, humans have progressively been using technology to increase their share of dynamic equilibrium. We domesticate plants and develop farming, and we domesticate animals, do labor. We also studied metals and their uses, which allowed us to survive through longer winters, as well as to defend ourselves, as well as to lay the foundations of mechanical development. However, as we saw in history, civilizations with a greater share of energy, basically better technology, tended to dominate those with lesser forms of energy. And we can also graph this mathematically. So before the invention of modern machinery, the average amount of extraneous energy used per capita this was basically about before the Industrial Revolution, was about 2,000 kilogram calories. So basically about another human being's worth. However, through the subsequent use of much greater forms of extraneous energy, research, medicine, a greater total share of the flow of energy in terms of better fuel usage, humanity has been able to continuously increase its average extraneous energy use per capita. And I did the mathematics, and currently right now, it went from 2,000 kilogram calories before the Industrial Revolution to now today 68 million kilogram calories per capita. However, this increased use of high energy in our high energy civilization required advancements in transportation and machinery. This is a very easy chapter. Basically, our need to collect and utilize greater extraneous energy led to the developments and modernizations of railroads, steamboats, automobiles, airplanes, and nowadays space transportation. And so basically greater needs required greater machinery. And so lesson 13, now we go into the industrial growth curves. And so basically this thing is a very simple chapter. Basically what it is human civilizations grow depending on their use of extraneous energy. And so if all the farms are wiped out, human population will be decimated. If farms are able to develop freely, if we're able to gather more use of energy, human population soars, like we saw in the dynamic equilibrium. Similarly, industries, what we use to facilitate this, such as steelworking, transportation, modern farming, modern medicine, all that jazz, depends on our civilization's ability to produce in terms of due labor, such as man hours or kilowatt hours. Both these depend on one another. However, industry is physically tied to the amount of natural resources we have on hand. And so there's a limit to where our industrial growth can grow, but not humanity can grow. And so this establishes Technocracy's early concept of renewable and non-renewable resources, which they call recurrent and non-recurrent resources. Almost done. Mineral resources. And so what we also is that modern high energy civilizations, the one that use modern machinery and technology, have a certain list, a certain menu of key minerals which they need in order to sustain their industries, which low energy civilizations did not. And so basically an example in early these was the use of coal and oil as energy and copper and iron as metals. We also heard the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, I think it is. Right now we're basically in the computer age. And so one of the key minerals that we have added to our list of, that we've added to our grocery list is silicon. And so basically we're seeing that right now, the chip shortage is affecting the production of automobiles because there's a silicon shortage, which is needed for the high electronics used in, amongst other things, cars. And so what we also saw from this is that the unequal distribution of resources across the planet in terms of natural resources affects, or at least affected, a civilization's ability to become a high energy civilization, mainly concentrating it along the North Atlantic where a lot of iron deposits were. And so many civilizations, many different countries in today, in order to become high energy civilizations, must acquire these key minerals somehow, some way, either through, used to be war, nowadays a lot of times it's simply trade. A little bit more about growth curves. This mainly has to do with labor and humanity and machinery. And so we saw in the units, one unit of measurement is a person hour, or used to be called man hour, used in labor. And so something can be said to be produced in a certain number of man hours. And so in order to increase production before the Industrial Revolution, you would have to increase the man hours, either by increasing their total workforce or increasing the duration that they worked. What we saw is that after the Industrial Revolution, machines were a lot better at monotonous labor than human. And so they tend to do more work in a short period of time. And so the process of mechanization, what we've seen in labor, tends to reduce the number of man hours required or person hours required in a given field to produce the same or more output. All right, simply we're going to take a quick detour to the price system. And so our modern economies rely on the concept of value, which is in relation to the relative abundance of a product. And so basically, in general, a product's value decreases as that product becomes more abundant. We measure this value in terms of tokens of money, otherwise debt tokens, debt certificates, i.e. bonds, which are exchangeable for certain products. Any system that uses debt tokens, money, or price constitutes what we call today a price system. This goes from everything from free markets to communist countries. All right, rules of the price system are simple. And so there's no fixed relationship between a physical object and its value. The object's value, product's value can be one thing one day and another day and another value another day. And there's no physical reason why that is. That's just all up in the air. Similarly, debt in terms of money and tokens can simply be created out of thin air through interest rates or by simply governments printing out money. And so in other words, value does not really constitute anything, does not constitute a measurement of anything real in our physical universe. It's simply unnatural. However, the flow of money is what allows all industries in today's time to operate. And so goods move in one direction from the earth to the consumer, and money goes from the consumer down the line back in the end to the landowner. However, not all the money is returned to the industry. It's not a self-sustained system. Many individuals, to protect against bad times, save money or store it in forms of either bank accounts. In corporations, they save it in terms of coffers, I think they call it. And they can also reinvest money back into the industry by simply building new factories and machinery just in case. And so this is another way of saving money. However, it does create a surplus of factories and machineries. All right, we're almost done, getting towards the finish line. Why the purchasing power is not maintained. And so simply put, another rule of the price game is that a corporation, a businessman, an individual must make a profit in order to survive. And that's just simply the rules of the game. Profit can be increased either by increasing the sale or consumption of product or by decreasing the internal cost of production for that product. And so one of the most effective ways in today's time, back during the Industrial Revolution and the Great Depression, one of the great ways to save internal costs was simply to replace workers with machineries. And so which laid off to a great number of workers from the worker pool. And as we know, our current system is built upon salaries and wages, which are directly proportional to the amount of time that people are able to work. And so with fewer people working fewer hours, you have the flow of money stymied, basically like cinched at the bottom, because individuals are now losing their ability to gather a wage or salary. Other operating characteristics under the price system. Other ways to increase the profit is by increasing the sales by purposely making inferior products that break easily, break quickly, and therefore have a high turnover rate. This is termed planned obsolescence by one of my economist friends, or artificial scarcity. And this includes everything today from electronics to medicine. Corporations can also generate industry through wars, unnecessary conflict, as well as unfair trade practices. They also increase the scarcity, the general scarcity of product, by reducing the load factor, or basically by not using machines as often or as well as possible, as well as they could. One of the last things is understand the nature of the human animal. Basically, the human animal is, in the end, still an animal and is significantly affected by her environment, her training, and her psychological makeup. And so, simply put, human beings are still animals, and just as animals can be trained, conditioned, are affected by psychological makeup, have animal-like tendencies that affect our modern ways and stuff like that, so too do humans as well. And one of the things that we know is that some humans, through a mixture of training, development, or just simply natural talent, are better in certain occupations or leadership roles than others. We have extroverts and we have introverts like me. You have some people who are great at public speaking. You have people who aren't great at public speaking. There's just a smorgasbord of individuals, and some of those individuals just, in certain situations, if you put them on an island, they would develop to become the natural leaders of certain groups. All right, so now we're getting to design. A lot of lesson 22 and 23 is a little bit, tiny bit outdated a bit. This was definitely painted with a scientific idealism back in the 30s, where we thought we'd get flying cars on the moon by the 70s. And so some of this can be updated a tiny bit. However, some stuff is still relevant in today's world. And so the conflicts that we suffer today are basically a conflict between physical reality and the antiquated ideology of our price systems, basically systems of value and the unnatural unit of price. And so what technocracy back then advocated was an operation based upon the technological mechanism, basically technate, that runs on the physical laws of thermodynamics, of production distribution, basically energy. And so they advocated to replace all of the debt tokens and money with units of energy. Back then it was the ergs or the joules. Nowadays it can be seen as the kilowatt hours. And so individuals So an energy survey will be conducted every 2 years to, like was done at Columbia University, to tally the total number of kilowatt hours the continent of North America, for example, produce every 2 years, and to give an equal allotment of that total energy to every human citizen after overhead is subtracted in terms of like roads being built, hospitals, military, things of that nature. And goods and services will be priced in terms of how many kilowatt hours it takes to produce them. And so this was the foundation of what they termed as the Technate of North America, or the North American Technate. Some of the industrial design and operating characteristics of such a technocracy would have included increasing the load factor of all factories and machinery to at least to as much as 100% as possible, which can definitely be done nowadays with our advancement in automation and machinery. This will help conserve factory space, factories, machines, and reduce the weathering of certain machinery just laying out and about. Furthermore, the highest quality product will be produced, not only in terms of manufacturing like electronics, but also in terms of medicine. Is shown that the higher quality of product tend to be the most energy efficient. And so the Technate, in hoping to reduce the overhead cost, would only produce the highest quality goods, which in turn also benefits us as consumers, as we will have higher quality products, higher quality healthcare, higher quality this and that. One of the things I also advocated was revising the calendar so that the work and normal day-to-day productions is spread evenly across each workday. So you don't get the weekend effect. You don't get the rush hour or the morning rush hour or the afternoon rush hour. I definitely experienced this and advocate for this, especially after going through DC traffic every day. And so this is how Technocracy hoped to smooth out a bit of the bumpy characteristics of production and distribution. And I think one of the final things is financial occupations will become obsolete. Similar to like how glassmakers became obsolete when machinery came about, or how newspaper boys became obsolete when modern telecommunications came about. Financial occupations and the financial sector will just simply be a bygone era, and those individuals will need to be retrained or asked to be retrained to fit more different occupations that fit our technological society. So we're coming to the end here. Technocracy 3 ages. And so Technocracy had a great spurn of interest and activity between the 30s and the 40s. We hosted many members and many function meetings. We mainly had a lot of membership along the West Coast, like in California, Oregon, as well as in Canada. And so we had a regular magazine, regular production. Howard Scott and many other technocrats were out giving speeches hither and thither. And so we were quite a bumpin' group. Today, we've sort of gone down to a sort of low energy, sort of like phantom power system due to perceived economic prosperity. Membership in looking in the system, how energy affects the system has kind of gone downhill, I think since the 70s. And so a lot of individuals have stopped really simply looking into the effects of energy on society, and in terms has stopped looking into groups like Technocracy Incorporated today. And so we're kind of like a NASA satellite that's going into deep space right now. It's not expected to be doing much for a bit. And so we're going into a low sort of phantom power. And so we transitioned to the digital age. We maintain a website presence. We host interns, as you can see in the center, who conduct research, try to do research on modern day technocracy ideals, as well as try to generate membership as much as possible through organization and I would say so advertisement over on the right with me. And so that is the end of my presentation. I thank you for being my hostage for the past 30 minutes. And so if you like, I will now allow myself to become your hostage for a Q&A. Over.
So Fred, did you have any questions for Parker? I know I do.
I think you've made many very valid points, so I compliment you with that. And I think it's really great and amazing that people have been thinking along those lines for such a long time, as you remarked, Mark. First of all, are you familiar with the work of the astrophysicist Eric Chason, who's been trying to measure energy and energy flows in universe, including on Earth? Might be interesting to look at that, if you're not. And I can give you references later. And the second person I'd like to mention is Joseph Tainter, who's also done a lot of interesting work on energy flows and first the collapse of societies. Also, I can give you those references if you're not familiar with that.
Yes, if you don't mind, I would definitely appreciate it. So when I'm not working in my day job as a scientist, I also have other responsibilities that I tend to as well. And I'm also training to become a NASA astronaut. But when I do have the little bit of spare time, I do try to read and educate myself on important topics. And so I'm trying to become informed on everything from Native American culture to nuclear energy. That's because a lot of that stuff affects the North American continent, and which is basically where I put my little field of focus at the moment. However, if you have information books on, like you're talking about with Tainter and Chatham, on the flows of energy and energies and the rise and falls of civilization, I'd definitely be interested in that, because that's definitely the lane that I'm looking for. And so I'm definitely, really interested in the flows of energy, especially of the universe. Back in Technocracy Inc., it was 1932, the sun was the only really source of energy, universal energy we have. But now with modern research, we know that there are great quantities of untapped energy out there in space in itself, in the universe, even within our own solar system, or even within our own planet. And so the untapped potential sources is definitely very intriguing, very definitely enlightening. Very happy to see what the future holds for us. Over.
Fred,
Okay.
you don't mind throwing those names in the chat, would you? Just the names, we can Google them.
Okay, I'll do that. And I'll also add Václav Smil, which I forgot to mention, but is obviously a major energy expert.
Okay, and you can add more than the names, but even the names would be helpful.
So I know with current advancement, we have advancement and possibilities of antimatter energy, which is super duper clean. I know there's still a little work in fission, and of course, there's always the sci-fi dreams of harvesting the energy from stars, nearby stars. Over.
But now I'd like to add some comments. Let's say this technocracy approach, in a way, is very interesting, very valid, but it also reminds me of what I was told when I was a kid. And what I became worried about, although I didn't know anything really about it at that time, was that it seemed to lack a social dimension. The social dynamics of people, of societies, as they have changed over time, is to some extent present in the way that you're saying that, say, high energy societies tend to dominate lower energy society. But what is the general dynamics of human history in terms of societies, and how does that relate to affect the processes that you mentioned? I think that is a major worry that I had at the time. That's what I spent a considerable part of my life on, to think about those things and to find out by studying social sciences. And I do think that it might be helpful for people in the technocracy field to engage in conversations with knowledgeable sociologists, so to speak, or social scientists, historians.
I agree. A lot of the technocracy core ideas definitely try to be as scientific as possible, and so they tend to shy away from civilizations, cultures, customs of that nature, instead taking a sort of necessity approach. So basically, I know that in the course, it does mention about social change and social dynamics, and cultural change and cultural changes. But what Dr. M. King Hubbert just basically mentioned was that in the first place, societies care about the necessities first, such as food, fuel, and shelter. And then afterwards, they care about the social norms, social customs, social change. What we do look at, I think it is kind of like subtly mentioned in the course, is that in terms of social change and civilizations upgrading, things of that nature, there's a lot of hullabaloo about political change, sociological change, morality change, religious change of civilizations. However, none of those made so much a significant impact on the changes of society as did energy. And so basically you have your political changes of the American Revolution, you have the development of modern American democracy, the sort of religious changes that occurred in the burned over districts and in the new movements. However, society really started changing only at the use of high energy. That's really what came down to. And so basically the idea is that you can write all the political manifestos that you want. However, it's not going to change the direction of even the smallest tributary. And so it's the flow of energy and the physical processes that humans are able to acquire that does really give at least the foundation for a rise of social change. But I agree, it would benefit technocracy to sort of like mix them in a little bit with informed sociologists and informed economists, like they did in the Technical Alliance, just so we're not living in an echo chamber. Over.
Yes, well, I very much agree concerning the importance of trying to obtain energy and use it. But also, let's say, societies may hold themselves back in doing that because of their own structure, or they might be held back by others in doing so. It is not such a straightforward process, but the overriding importance of energy, we totally agree on.
Roger, yeah. So what is seen is that with our modern technology, research and advancements, we currently have achieved sort of an era of abundance. And so with modern technology and research and science, we can create a high physical standard of living on a given area, such as like planet Earth. However, with the rules of the price system, in terms of like corporations have to make a profit in order to survive, and profit and price really only survive in a land of scarcity, which is what we saw in terms of the price of something going down when its scarcity decreases, when it's become more abundant, is that our current price system can only live in an era of scarcity and can't live in an era of abundance. And so we see a lot of, in terms of like artificial scarcity, in terms of corporations making inferior products in order to maintain the industries. And so we see a lot of that with modern, even something as simple as like modern light bulbs, tires, razor blades, things of that nature. You also have, I think it's what's called planned scarcity, which is basically the marketing technique that Apple Incorporated use, a lot of the automobile industries use in order to generate turnover. We also see it in medicine. There was actually recently, Goldman Sachs actually recently released a report warning investors that a new advanced type of hepatitis medication would actually decrease the consumer pool of individuals sick with hepatitis. And so they're warning that this was bad for investment and that basically work should be done to try and curtail that. And so you have a corporation that wants to keep individuals sick because it maintains the profit. And so I say that the price system is definitely holding back societies from using high energy civilization, using the energy they've acquired in order to release an era of abundance upon their given people. I would say it's the price system that's holding individuals back. Over.
Okay. In many ways, I agree, but I also tend to think that even if there is an abundant production, it doesn't stop being abundant. Simply what it means is that the prices for those goods are going down towards the cost of production. And so if you are producing grain, and there's a lot of grain in the world, depending on the situation, sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, or you produce potatoes, then you basically find yourself being pushed down towards the cost of production for the prices of your products. But you won't go out of business unless it goes below the price of production, and that is when the competitors that produce for the lowest cost will survive. But still, what you find is in many ways is that even though what you're saying, if you can monopolize your products, then you can drive up the prices. If you can, you find yourself on that other road. It's a bit of a mixed bag, or so it seems to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag, and it's definitely interesting to look at. And so it's definitely fascinating to look into all the tiny but important mechanisms that go into production distribution in any sort of markets, as well as looking at, you have the currency and the system, the prices on one hand, and you're also looking at the energy side on the other hand, and just seeing the mechanisms and how those two operate and how they react differently to certain processes. That's definitely very interesting. And you have a whole slew of history that you can look at. And so I do find that kind of fascinating. It's definitely a complicated problem. And as we're talking about with like man hours and person hours, right now it's like it feels like I'm the only individual on the assembly line. And so just to do this vast quantity of research, I'm thinking about kidnapping the IBM computer Watson, just so he can help me start doing this research, because it's taking a lot of hours. And like we're talking about with the whole range of history, to be able to look at this, it's definitely a very vast, unexplored territory that requires a lot of effort and individuals. Over.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps Mark has some questions or comments.
Okay, you're talking about energy tokens, kilowatt hours, that sort of thing, replacing what you call debt tokens, which could also be called money, I would guess. So how would those be calculated? How would those be allocated among people? Would people just get a certain amount each month to spend as they wish? Or how would they be allocated? How would they be created?
So with Technocracy, what the course talks about is it has on the price system on one side, which uses it uses the general term debt tokens. That's anything from money to IOUs to bonds to trade stocks, anything from the US dollar to the communist ruble. This is back during 1932. And so over on the other hand, you have the system of production distribution based on thermodynamics. And so like we're talking about how energy can be measured in terms of the work it produced, in terms of like these units of ergs, joules. The course uses ergs. This is back in 32. I think in modern times we can use the term kilowatt hours. And so what Technocracy Inc. advocated back then was, since the notion of value is unnatural and it fluctuates, money and debt can be created hither and thither out of nowhere. It's unnatural, and it's not a unit of measurement for anything physical in real life. However, on the other hand, you have every process on the earth that incorporates work, everything from hurricanes to steel manufacturing, being measurable in units of energy, with fuels that can also be measured and are also consistent because of the laws of thermodynamics and because the heat value of a certain grade of fuel does not change. Basing the production distribution on units of energy, such as kilowatt hours in our case, would be a lot more stable. And so just like in 1919, where they conducted an energy survey in North America, it counted all the coal factories, oil refineries, things of that nature, and calculate how much energy those produced in terms of fuel, which can be used for work every 2 years, so too would the technate and theoretical do an energy survey every 2 years to count the number of like hydropower plants, nuclear power plants, solar farms, things of that nature, calculate the total amount of energy that the continent produces, and then it would, after an overhead, which basically it looks, okay, how many roads are we going to build in 2 years? How many hospitals are we going to build in 2 years? What's the military going to cost? After taking that overhead off, the remaining amount of energy, which can be used to make anything from duct tape to TVs, would be distributed equally to every citizen in the technate. And so what they looked at is that this would resemble something similar to like a credit card. And so every 2 years, you get an equal allotment of the total amount of energy that the technate can use to produce any sort of given product that you require. And so after 2 years, those accounts would be cleared, a new energy survey would be conducted, and then you'd be given a fresh, greater allotment of energy because of greater advancements in fuel production, such as like antimatter research or fission, and in terms of reducing the overhead, in terms of creating higher quality products or reducing the load on the healthcare because of modern medicine. And so individuals will be given an allotment of kilowatt hours, which they can use to purchase anything from shoes to books. Over.
Okay, so January of year one, I take my energy units and I just splurge on salmon and caviar that first month, really high energy intensive foods. So I'm fat with salmon, but then I'm broke by February of the first year. What then?
So you have some individuals who do that. That's a very unique situation. That's
Unique, really?
that could be looked into in terms of, I would say, like psychiatry. And so it's similar to, what if someone goes about and splurges everything on at the gumball machines in their local town? Well, the only individuals who can really do that, who can do that right this second, are many of the wealthy individuals, such as millionaires, billionaires. any millionaire right now can go out and buy out every item in a vending machine within a 10-mile radius. However, we don't hear about many millionaires who do. They could do that and it wouldn't be a percentage of the amount of money that they have, but they can do it, but they don't do it. Simply put is that it's not really expected that individuals, it just doesn't really come across anyone's mind. I mean, I could do it today, but it doesn't really come across my mind. And so there is a certain limit, physical limit to how much an individual can consume. Even if they have like all the willpower, people have to sleep 8 hours a day. Individuals are going to have to work between 4 to 8 hours a day. And so there's only given a small window in a day in order to consume this. So they have that going against them as well. Also, in terms of that, there is a safe lock in that it doesn't have to be that the amount of energy is given and one lump sum like a lottery every 2 years. It could be that, this is a significant problem. How about we chop it up so that they get half of their allotment every year, or they get a fourth of their allotment every 6 months, or they get an eighth every 3 months. And so you only get a tiny little bit, say like per unit time. And so if that does become a situation, there's always a safe lock saying like, okay, well, you're not going to get in a lump sum anymore because you're going to buy it on salmon, on caviar, and you're making the whole population go extinct. We're going to give it to you in little, tiny little bits. And if you do something with that, you do something with that. Over.
So would you say that at least on the demand side, it's a free market?
It is 800% a free market. And so what it is it is 800% is definitely a free market.
Okay.
And so what is individuals, as a product is purchased more and more and more, in terms of even in today's economies, as a product is purchased more and more manufacturing is directed to meet the need. And so that wouldn't really change between what they saw as a technique and a price system, is that as a product or a good is required more and more manufacturing can be directed to it. And as a product is used less and less, less amount of manufacturing or factory space would be allocated to it. The course does say that as what is running on is the calculations at that time was that the average load factor of any given factory was about 33%. Basically, a factory ran 8 hours a day, then shut down for their other 16 hours. With the Technocracy calendar and spreading the work evenly across the work days and even across the days itself, increasing the load factor to 100% meant that you could scrap the other, if you increase a factory's load factor to 100%, you could scrap the other two factories. And so you have all these factories that are unused, would be scrapped for recycling, or what they could be done is a smart factory could be built, which is it can be repurposed hither and thither as needed. And so if a product is definitely seen to need to be increased in production, such as food, clothing, material, vehicles, things of that nature, more of these factories, which would have been scrapped or left to just wear and tear in the weather, could be used and outfitted to meet that increased demand and supply. And so basically no change from the current price system we have, just a little bit more cleaner. Over.
Let's talk more about the supply end. How would decision making be? For instance, say everyone decided they wanted salmon, there's some big trend or something, but there really wasn't enough salmon. How would you handle that? How would there be a decision-making mechanism or governments to figure out what is beneficial for the environment to be produced and what isn't beneficial, for instance?
So the government or the technate wouldn't make any personal decisions on their end as to what is built, what is produced, what is manufactured. Anything that is produced, anything that's purchased and consumed by the population, we do it even today, is tallied, calculated, and recorded by archivists and recorders. And so they say, all right, well, a certain number of corn is produced and consumed per year. A total number of vehicles are produced and purchased each year. You can do all this on a simple Lenovo computer. And so with that, there's no personal decision-making process. It's just shown that, all right, well, there's an increase in this amount of consumption. And so an increase in this amount of production needs to be met in order to meet the demands of this current product or this current demand. Now, in terms of individuals going all out on a certain product, which is what we can call fad, there's really nothing can be there's no way to predict a fad coming out and about. You can see that basically if we can just take corn, for example, the average amount of corn produced and consumed per year increases by about 4% each year. And this basically just because the population is growing the same way. Similar with cars tend to be consumed at basically this, as population increases, the consumption of cars increases to meet those new people as well. And so we've been calculating this, we've actually been recording this for 100 years. And so we've actually gotten pretty good. We actually have some pretty good charts. You can adequately predict how much increase of percentage of consumption is going to be needed for really any given product in any given year, because it's been continuing the same thing since before. The only reason why that would be affected is with economic depressions, which is what the course does look into. As we were talking about with the lesson 13, about the industrial growth curves. As civilizations, utilize more energy, they tend to produce more. On that same side, industries need to grow at the same rate, or need to grow along with human civilizations in order to meet human civilization's need, and those two are sort of like entwined. So as one falls, the other falls. What we saw with, when we look back into the Great Depressions, we saw with economic Great Depressions, there was also a decrease in production, anything from pig iron to automobiles to rifles and things of that nature. And so you do see, though the average consumption is predictable, if everything is cool, you do have those depressions hither and thither. The same thing is, you can't really predict economic depressions though in our time. You can have low waves here and there, but you can't really predict them. In terms of fads, that is something that's something like a mini reverse of a Great Depression. And so with fads, like if everyone decided to purchase salmon for some reason, it's kind of weird to think that why that would become a fad in the first place. It's weird to think why fads would become fads. Usually you see fads in terms of clothing and in terms of toys or things that nature, gadgets. It's hard to predict those, and so simply put, there would be empty shelves of those products. And so but that's not really like a kill switch. If there's a fad for one of the spinning tops, if there's another fad for the spinning tops, and there's just simply not enough, like the technique didn't predict this fad and they didn't produce enough factories to produce enough tops, there's going to be a slack of tops hither and thither. But that's not really a kill switch. What we're looking at really is food, clothing, shelter, and all that nature. Over.
Okay. So if there are any other questions, please jump in.
Well, if I may, I have two comments. I have a great many comments, but let's restrict myself to two. I think all of this raises, first of all, the question is, why would people consume beyond their basic needs? And those basic needs may be very differently defined in different circumstances. So that's the first question. And the second question is, what about the fact that we live on one single planet with limited resources? How would that affect all of that?
And so you have individuals who consume beyond their basic needs. And so as we're talking about how the human animal is in the end an animal, she is also, affected significantly by her environment and her psychological makeup and her training. And so with that, you can have individuals, I haven't done this research in psychology, but you can have individuals who are very materialistic or very consumption oriented just by how they're born, just by how their brain is hardwired and made up. And so you have those individuals. You have other individuals who can build a cabin in the woods and live a very Zen lifestyle, just eating water, just drinking water and eating rice and all that jazz. So you have those two different individuals. However, what we do have, which is definitely of significant importance, is that humans can be developed and conditioned to consume more. And like I was saying with the Apple corporations and the car corporations, what they use is what's called planned scarcity. And so you see a lot of this with advertisements and fads. And so you see basically say taking Apple, for example, you have each new year they come out with a new iPhone. And so you have the company that is creating ads and commercials that's targeting, basically saying the current iPhone you have right now is outdated. You need to throw it out and get the new one. And same thing with cars, is that the last, Subaru Prius, whatever, was outdated. You need to get this new car, even though the one you already have will work well for 10 years or 15 years onward. And so you can have corporations. Corporations are definitely interested in having humans consume more than their basic needs. That's because that in turn increases turnover, which increases sales, increases profits. You think you have a question?
Well, you certainly make a good point, but there was an author that you mentioned, Thorstein Veblen, or Veblen, I don't know how you pronounce it. And I think he argued, and I think very successfully, that people consume very often for prestige reasons, that it helps them to increase their prestige among the groups that they want to be part of. And that's also why people want to show off their iPhones quite often, for instance. So it is driven by social factors that are not necessarily technological in nature. And I think that's a very important point that is of general occurrence, and that can lead to very different types of consumption. I could tell you a lot about that, but let's not start doing that. But it seems to be a very important point. That's a prestige-driven consumption.
And so Dr. M. King Hubbard does bring that up in the course. And so we definitely see prestige. A lot with prestige is that something is prestigious basically because it is hard to acquire financially. And so you have the iPhones, which are expensive. You have jewelry and all that jazz, which is expensive. You have yachts, which are expensive. That's why you see a huge market in terms of fake products, so that individuals who don't want to spend the financial security, they can get something that can pass it off as something a real thing. What Dr. M. King Hubbard mentioned is that with the equal alignment of energy and with basically the greater release of this era of abundance in modern energy usage and technology, is that now you have really no difference between, you have no purchasing power difference between, say, like two common individuals. And so he actually mentioned that this would actually be a benefit for society. And he used the example of basically expensive wedding rings or expensive gifts between like a male individual trying to court a female person. And so in our day's time, an individual can court another individual by lavishing them with gifts, prestigious items and things of that nature. In a technate where both that individual and the other individual can both purchase the same thing, there's no financial barrier between them. Now it's harder for that one individual to lavish the other one because they can acquire the same things. And so now in terms of like relationships and courtship and the concept of love is that it will then behoove individuals to pair up with individuals who don't complete them materially, but complete them in some sort of like the philosophical sort of like moralistic ideas that you prefer. And so he actually mentioned that the use of high energy and the release of higher energy in a society would bring out basically the better in people because it gets rid of this prestige and materialistic look and factors that we're facing today. And then you mentioned...
Yeah, I think that's where the second point is coming in. We live on a limited planet with limited resources. And how does that affect the argument that you just made?
And so what we have is, with our current price system, is one of the ways that corporations can increase turnover and thus save price and profit is to create inferior products. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose the picture of the trash floating in the ocean as the image for that lesson, is because corporations follow the profit motive, which is basically they have to make a profit in order to survive. And that's the end all be all. And so the problem is that the profit motive usually leads to situations that are harmful to the planet in terms of over-exploitation of resources by creating inferior quality goods, also by destroying the environment because it's not profit-inducive to save or restore the environment. And so you had to have government regulation back in the 70s in order to clear that off. And so you have the profit motive is definitely, corporations will drain the last drop of oil in our emergency reserves if it means to create at least another quarter that they can survive. In terms of the technate, in terms of a technate, which bases basically the flow, production, distribution on the amount of energy and fuel we produce, it is a lot more foreseeing as to the sources of energy in terms of like, okay, well, and Dr. M. King Hubbard actually also posits this in that he advocated not draining our current emergency reserve of oils, which take millions of years to produce, and instead tries to advocate the use of renewable resources because that is, of course, renewable, it's greener, and also it has basically a little bit more unlimited potential. And so you have that in terms of saving fuel and improving the protection of the environment through the production of higher quality goods. In terms of the natural resources on the planet, Technocracy Inc. is definitely natural resource focused. And so, like we said with corporation, the profit motive, the profit is the first things first, and that's no blame on them. They have to make a profit in order to survive. However, with Technocracy Incorporated, with profit gone away with, now we can think, okay, well, we have only a certain number of this and a certain number of that. So either we need to curtail production on either this will have to be curtailed because energy will become too much in order to produce it, or we'll have to use modern research and technology to find a workaround. Or, as I prefer to think of it, as we can look into space because space is a minefield, an unlimited minefield of resources. We have a comet that's floating close by the planet, which currently has $10,000 trillion worth of iron on it. And so if that planet slammed into the Earth, or if it simply floated down onto the Earth like a feather, it would wreak havoc either way, because either if it slams in the Earth, it's like a 2012 Doomsday Armageddon. If a feather is down to the Earth and simply lands softly, it will cause havoc on the Earth by the financial system, because now the price of iron would just plummet dramatically, which will cause financial havoc around the Earth. However, without profit motive, that's no problem. That's $10,000 trillion worth of iron that can be used for anything from paper clips to modern aircraft carriers. And so Technocracy is definitely natural resources focused, definitely more so than the price system. And so it might not have everything done correctly, might not have everything planned back in 1932, but it's definitely a step in the right and cleaner direction. Over.
Well, I think we could continue this discussion for many hours. Not sure we should do that. But I think also this type of argument became certainly popular in the 1950s, 1960s, when the differences between, let's say, low and high income were decreasing in the United States, but also in Western Europe, let's say the North Atlantic part of it, that was not part of the communist regime. But since the 1980s, the trend has been reversed. And now we find ourselves with growing differences of income in the United States. Some people call it even, let's say, the disappearing middle class. And to a lesser extent, that's happening in Europe as well. So how does that affect your arguments?
So that would go back to the flow of money lesson. And so you have, this kind of gets into a little bit of the ideological side, but it's not so really, but individuals who own the land, own the industries, own the machinery and whatnot, have a greater share of the pull of the total flow of money. And so when we're talking about the flow of money, is one of the problems Technocracy Inc. and like Dr. M. King Hubbard had with it is that if money is the unit that is used to measure production distribution, as to measure what is produced and what's distributed, one of the problems with it is that it's not clean, it's not predictable, it's not cyclic, it doesn't flow back and forth. As it goes through, money is saved by different individuals, or it's collected by more individuals. And so what we have here is with the, say like with the higher class, I'm going to use the model here like the rich get richer and all that jazz, which is, that's just the rules of the price game. It is what it is. And they just tend to save more money. They're just able to save more money through, as money flows through them than other individuals. With the lower income individuals, one of the things that we're definitely looking out for, especially nowadays, is the use of automation and machinery displacing workers out of industries. And so we see this everywhere from truck drivers to even lawyers, who are being now replaced and are about to be massively replaced by the introduction of modern automation and machinery. And as we're talking about with like production being, used to be definitely 100% in terms of like man hours or person hours, then that starts switching over to kilowatt hours during the Industrial Revolution for a lot of the portions. Now we're seeing with even more modern innovation and technology, those total amount of person hours, which are used for wages and salaries, are decreasing to dangerously low levels. And so you basically you won't have enough workers working long enough to gather the enough wage or salary to then purchase products that were produced. And so you have that it's sort of like putting a tourniquet on the neck of the flow of production distribution. And so that's where you have, I think, you have the current the lower economic individuals, their income decreasing, the reduction of the middle class. So you're seeing that this flow of money definitely pools like a river in areas that are counterintuitive to a sustainable and stable system of production distribution. And that's where Technocracy Inc. tries to advocate for something that is a little bit more stable, a little bit more real, using energy, kilowatt hours, and the basic laws of physics and thermodynamics. Over.
Well, I tend to disagree, because if you look at who are the wealthiest person of the globe, they hardly own anything, materially speaking, by comparison. Certainly not anything that is, in terms of matter and energy, worth all those billions. It's all totally immaterial almost. It's about information, it's about speculation on the stock exchange. In other words, it's the creation of money that has no let's say, basis in material production, or hardly any, but it is all about expected capital gains, or so it seems to me. So and that's a very different situation from the situation that existed in the 1930s, even the 1950s and 60s when I grew up, when the stock exchange was far more based on production as you described it. So we find ourselves living in a very different age, I think.
Agreed. Things have developed. The economy has developed and made new things, just like the computer, the branch of computer science has developed and changed and created new things as well. So what Technocracy Inc. has written down, or what Dr. M. King Hubbard wrote down in the course, you can definitely try to extrapolate that into our modern times. And so you're mentioning about a lot of the flow of money circles around individuals in terms of the information, in terms of speculation, not really in terms of anything in physical production. And so I agree. That's one of the things I left out because there's that and multiple other fields that definitely have a lion's share of the flow of money and therefore the flow of purchasing power and goods. But as we were talking about, it's nothing really immaterial, which is kind of a downer. You would hope for that, and as many occupations as possible. You need information, of course, but you would hope that a lot of processes and occupations would at least deal, at least in some point, with the physical processes of a country or area or like a continent. However, we don't see that is the price system does not favor that. Where the price system favors, that's where you find the money. And so you find that, like, as you're mentioning it, in like informations, banking, stock, speculation, things of that nature, which is unfortunate, but it is the sign of the times.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any other further questions or comments? Okay, I'd like to thank you all for coming. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Parker, that was a good presentation. I kind of went through a lot of the ideas behind Technocracy, some of its history, and some of its ideas and proposals. So thank you for that. Fred, you had a lot of good comments, and just the flow of the conversation back and forth was very informational, kind of exploring and poking at some of the ideas. And I thank you all very much for coming. There will be an announcement about next lecture. We may be getting the European Organization for Sustainability, currently the Earth Organization. And I'm trying to twist the arm of the Energy folks who are doing a lot with the form of energy accounting, kind of talked about how one unit of energy is different than another unit, so to speak. And then I may be presenting myself, and anyway, I'll keep you posted. Thanks for coming. It's great to have you all together and hearing you both kind of discuss this. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, everyone.